When Chuck Berry died in 2017, his family thought they knew everything about the rock and roll icon. They were wrong. Locked away in a hotel safe was a private collection so disturbing it made his past scandals look tame. This was the same man who had once been caught secretly filming women in the bathroom of his restaurant. But what investigators uncovered in that safe suggested something even darker, a side of Berry that even his closest loved ones had never imagined. To understand how Berry reached that point, you have to start at the beginning. He was born Charles Edward Anderson Berry on October 18, 1926, in St. Louis, Missouri, a city divided by segregation at every level. Yet his family stood apart. His father, Henry, was a Baptist deacon and contractor. His mother, Martha, was one of the rare black women of her generation to graduate college and become a school principal. The Berrys lived in the Ville, a proud black middle-class neighborhood where ambition and culture thrived. Chuck was the fourth of 6 children. Inside his home there was harmony, music, discipline, and faith. Outside, the world reminded him constantly that he didn't belong. Segregated schools, whites-only parks and pools, constant reminders of exclusion. Those early wounds would later echo through his music. Church was his first stage. At 6, he joined the choir at Antioch Baptist, absorbing rhythm, call and response, and the raw emotional force of gospel. He studied the congregation's reactions and discovered how performance could move people. At 15, Berry bought his first guitar for $14 from a neighbor. With no training, he locked himself in the basement and mimicked records by T-Bone Walker and Muddy Waters. Later, jazz guitarist Ira Harris refined his skills. By the time Berry performed Confessin', the blues at his Sumner High talent show, he already had a spark. Students cheered, administrators scowled, but Berry learned something crucial. Music could stir emotion, even cause trouble, and he liked it. But trouble soon consumed him. In 1944, at just 17, Berry joined 2 friends on a reckless road trip west. Armed with an abandoned pistol, they committed a string of robberies, a bakery, a clothing store, even a carjacking. Arrested and sentenced to 10 years, Berry spent 3 years in reform school before being released on his 21st birthday in 1947. He left with shame, but also determination. He married Themetta Toddy Suggs in 1948, who had waited faithfully through his sentence. A daughter, Ingrid, was born in 1950. By day, Berry worked as a janitor and studied hairdressing. By night, he chased music. Small gigs led to big ones, and a fateful New Year's Eve show in 1952 with pianist Johnny Johnson changed everything. Berry's unusual mix of blues and country drew laughter at first. Audiences called him a black hillbilly. But soon, they were dancing. The Chuck Berry Trio was born. By 1955, Berry drove to Chicago in search of Muddy Waters, who sent him to Chess Records. 1 week later, Berry returned with a demo that included a country-inspired song called Ida May. Chess renamed it Maybelline. When the single dropped, it exploded, selling over 1 million copies and breaking into the mainstream pop charts. It was revolutionary, a black artist crossing into white radio with a sound that fused genres and electrified youth culture. Berry's riffs became the language of rock and roll. His stage presence added a visual signature, the duck walk. Accidentally, born in 1955 when Berry crouched to hide his wrinkled suit while playing, the move sent crowds into a frenzy and became his trademark. By 1956, Berry had perfected his formula: sharp storytelling, teenage themes, and unstoppable rhythm. He declared war on the old guard with rollover Beethoven, telling classical music to step aside for rhythm and blues. In 1957, he gave bored students their anthem with School Days, closing with the immortal cry, "Hail, hail, rock and roll." And in 1958, he immortalized himself in Johnny B. Good, a partly autobiographical anthem that NASA would later launch into space. But fame didn't protect him from racism. Touring the South, he was spat on mid-performance. He opened Club Bandstand in 1959, where white and black teens could dance together, directly defying segregation. Authorities saw it as dangerous. They began watching him closely. By the end of 1959, everything unraveled. Berry was arrested under the Mann Act, accused of transporting a 14-year-old girl across state lines. The first trial was tainted by racism, but even after appeal, a second trial sent him to prison. The rising king of rock and roll was behind bars. By the end of the 1950s, Chuck Berry was on top of the world. He'd invented the blueprint for rock and roll, crossed racial barriers, and inspired a generation of kids on both sides of the Atlantic. But success brought scrutiny, and in December 1959, everything collapsed. Berry was arrested under the Mann Act, a 1910 law originally designed to combat human trafficking, but one often wielded against black men in America. Authorities claimed Berry had transported a 14-year-old, Native American girl, Janice Escalante, across state lines for immoral purposes. Berry said he had met her in Mexico, hired her to work at his club, then fired her. But after she was arrested on prostitution charges, police dragged Berry into the story. He denied the accusations, but his word wasn't enough in a Jim Crow courtroom. In March 1960, after a 2-week trial clouded by racist remarks from the judge, Berry was convicted, fined $5,000, and sentenced to 5 years. His lawyers appealed and won a retrial. In May 1961, a second jury found him guilty again. This time, he got 3 years. By February 1962, Berry was locked inside the Federal Medical Center in Springfield, Missouri. Prison slowed him, but it didn't stop him. Berry earned his high school diploma, studied law obsessively, and kept writing music. One of the songs he drafted, No Particular Place to Go, would later hit the charts, its lyrics about aimless drives now shadowed by his incarceration. Meanwhile, outside prison walls, the Beatles and Rolling Stones were covering his songs. His sound was everywhere. When Berry walked free in October 1963, he didn't return to an empty stage. He returned to a world that had been waiting for him. Back in the studio, he recorded Nadine and You Never Can Tell, both born behind bars. They became hits, proof that Berry's magic was still intact. Yet those who knew him saw a change. Carl Perkins, touring with him in 1964, said Berry seemed cold and distant, like something inside him had been left behind in prison. In 1966, Berry stunned the industry by leaving Chess Records for Mercury. The move backfired. 5 albums in 3 years, all flops. Mercury never understood his raw, electric style. By the time he returned to Chess in 1970, the momentum was gone, and then came his most unlikely hit. In 1972, Berry topped the Billboard Hot 100 for the first and only time with My Ding-a-Ling, a childish, innuendo-laced novelty song recorded live in England. Critics hated it, activists tried to ban it, parents protested. But the controversy only fueled sales. It sold over 1 million copies. To Berry's dismay, the only #1 of his career was also his silliest song. But success didn't soften him. Berry was infamous for his rule. No money, no show. He demanded cash in a suitcase before stepping on stage, a habit born from years of being ripped off. But in 1979, that same paranoia drew the attention of the IRS. Accused of tax evasion, Berry served 4 months in prison. He brought 2 dictionaries and his guitar, vowing to finally write his autobiography. Through the 1980s, he remained a touring legend, showing up to gigs without a band, forcing local musicians to back him on the fly. He kept control and kept people guessing. But the mask of eccentric genius shattered in 1990. That summer, police raided Berry's estate in Wentzville, Missouri. They were looking for cocaine. What they found instead was worse. 62 grams of marijuana, guns, $122,000 in cash, and tapes. Dozens of them. Hidden cameras had been installed inside the women's restroom at Berry's restaurant, the Southern Air. The footage revealed hundreds of women, including minors, filmed without consent. Some tapes paused on explicit frames, others appeared edited for his private viewing. By June 1990, 59 women had filed lawsuits. They accused Berry of voyeurism, exploitation, humiliation. In 1994, he settled, paying out $1.2 million to the victims and closing the bar. Southern Air forever. Investigators later revealed Berry had been collecting pornography since the 1970s, his stash filled with tapes, photos, and extreme fetishes. Some even featured Berry himself. Behind the scandals, there was still a family. He had married Themeta Toddy Suggs in 1948, and despite decades of infidelity and disgrace, she never left. They raised 4 children, Ingrid, Aloha, Charles Jr., and Melody. From 1996 until 2014, Berry performed over 200 shows at Blueberry Hill in St. Louis, often with his kids by his side. Fans cheered the legend, even as lawsuits and whispers haunted him. In 2000, longtime collaborator Johnny Johnson sued Berry for unpaid royalties, claiming he'd helped write classics like Roll Over Beethoven. The court dismissed it as too late. In truth, Berry's legal knowledge, sharpened in prison, had made him nearly untouchable. But age eventually caught him. On January 1, 2011, he collapsed mid-concert in Chicago. At 84, he tried to keep playing, slurring through the songs, but his body gave out. 6 years later, on March 18, 2017, Chuck Berry died at home at age 90. His fortune was estimated at $50 million. The world mourned the pioneer who had given rock and roll its swagger, but the safe found after his death told another story. It revealed a man who was not just flawed, but fractured. A genius whose music defined freedom, even as his private life exposed obsession, betrayal, and control. Chuck Berry's legacy is carved into the DNA of rock and roll. But the truth of his life is far darker than the songs he left behind. When Chuck Berry died in March 2017, the obituaries all sounded the same. They called him the father of rock and roll, the man who taught the Beatles and the Stones how to play, the genius who turned teenage rebellion into music. His family thought they knew the rest of the story, the scandals, the arrests, the lawsuits. In a hotel room Berry often used as a hideaway, investigators opened a safe. What they found inside shocked even those who had followed his darkest controversies. The tapes, the photographs, the files, it wasn't just about voyeurism anymore. It revealed a side of Chuck Berry that his family had never seen, and that his fans would never want to believe. Charles Edward Anderson Berry was born in 1926 in segregated St. Louis. His parents, Henry and Martha, were pillars of the black middle class. Inside their home there was music and ambition. Outside, there was only exclusion. As a boy, Chuck thought the first white men he saw, firefighters, had turned pale from fear. By his teens, he knew better. At 15, he bought a $14 guitar and taught himself by mimicking records in the basement. By 21, he was out of reform school for armed robbery, married to Themeta Toddy Suggs, and juggling janitorial work with music gigs. In 1955, his life changed with a single drive to Chicago. Chess Records heard Maybelline, and within months, Chuck Berry was a star. His guitar riffs became the DNA of rock. His duck walk became legend. His lyrics gave teenagers a new language: cars, school, rebellion, sex. Roll Over Beethoven, School Days, Sweet Little 16, Johnny Be Good. He wasn't just writing hits, he was inventing a culture. In 1959, while his music was topping the charts, police began watching him closely. That December, he was arrested under the Mann Act, accused of transporting a 14-year-old girl across state lines. His first trial was poisoned by racism, but even after appeal, he was sentenced to 3 years. He went to prison in 1962. When he walked out in 1963, the Beatles and Stones were already singing his songs. The world hadn't forgotten him, but prison had changed him. He was colder, harder. He studied law obsessively, so he'd never again be cheated out of royalties. He demanded cash in a suitcase before every show. No money, no music. It was his. Shield against exploitation, but also a wall between him and the world. His only #1 hit came in 1972, and it wasn't one of his anthems. It was My Ding-a-Ling, a childish double entendre recorded live. Critics hated it. Activists tried to ban it, but controversy made it a million seller. For the man who wrote Johnny B. Goode, it was a cruel irony. By the 1980s, Barry was less a pioneer than a puzzle. He toured constantly, often alone, forcing local musicians to back him. He was unpredictable, temperamental, sometimes brilliant, sometimes sloppy. And then in 1990, the mask shattered. Police raided his Missouri estate looking for drugs. Instead, they found guns, marijuana, and tapes, dozens of them. Hidden cameras in the women's restroom of his restaurant, the Southern Air. Hundreds of women filmed without their knowledge. Some were minors. Some of the footage was edited, paused, cataloged. The lawsuits came fast, 59 women in total. In 1994, Barry quietly settled, paying out $1.2 million, but the raid had uncovered more than just voyeurism. Investigators found Barry's vast private pornography collection, decades of tapes, photos, and writings. Some included Barry himself. Others revealed extreme fetishes. It was, authorities said, likely only a fraction of what he had recorded. Still, the family endured. Toddy stayed with him nearly 70 years. Their children, Ingrid, Aloha, Charles Jr., and Melody, often performed with him. From 1996 to 2014, Barry played over 200 shows at Blueberry Hill in St. Louis, his children on stage beside him. To fans, he was still the legend who gave the world rock and roll. But behind closed doors, lawsuits and scandals piled up. Collaborators, like Johnny Johnson, sued for royalties. Former employees sued for abuse. Even as his body failed, he collapsed on stage in 2011, his image remained split between icon and predator. On March 18, 2017, Chuck Berry died at home at age 90. Within hours, tributes poured in from presidents, rock stars, and fans worldwide. They called him a genius, a pioneer, a legend. Inside were tapes and files that confirmed what many had whispered for years. Chuck Berry had spent decades documenting his darkest impulses. It wasn't about money, or fame, or music. It was about control. The father of rock and roll had left behind more than riffs and lyrics. He left behind evidence of a life where brilliance and depravity lived side by side.